Hey everyone, it's Peter Kerr from Daydream Nation, and today we are going to do a deep dive on Whitesnake Slide It In. And here's a guest for you, Peter Jones from the Contrarians. How are you, mate?
Great to see you, Peter. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely.
It's an exciting topic. Great to be here.
Long overdue to get you on the channel. Good to see you, mate.
My pleasure.
So what we're going to do is, Pete, tell us about your first impressions of the album, and then I'll tell you mine. And then we'll do a track by track, the things we like, the things we don't, and maybe a bit of a historical, cultural context of the album when it came out in 1984. So
Sure.
take it away. Tell me what your first impressions of this album was.
Well, I got into Whitesnake as soon as I could find the first albums available in the US after David formed the band after the fallout of Deep Purple. I think I probably jumped in with Love Hunter, and I was able to find an importer who was able to bring those in. So I went from Love Hunter through the list, Ready and Willing, Come and Get It, Saints and Sinners, and got slided in pretty much, I think, the first month that it was released. So we're talking April, May of 84. And there's a lineup change, a noticeable lineup change. We've got the biggest one for me as a drummer. We've got Cozy Powell in the band, and my all-time favorite drummer, Ian, is not there anymore. Of course, he's back in Deep Purple, And so I listened to it, and we have to distinguish that version that I got was the US one that most people in the US are used to. And I fell in love with it. It's kind of the best of the pre-era, upgraded, a little heavier, a little more contemporary. Love that cover. And I found Dave's vocals had advanced. He sounds stronger. There's still the tongue-in-cheek lyrics, some of them you can take all these decades later, some of them maybe not so much, but that's how life works. So I was a huge fan of it, and it was on heavy rotation, and it has stayed on heavy rotation, maybe not necessarily in the US form. We'll get into that as we go, but it's a seminal record. It's an essential Whitesnake record. And for me, it's a transitional record. And it, to me, signifies the last of that early bluesy period that is my favorite era of Whitesnake. And you can see how things were slightly changing, where he was headed. And of course, history is what it is going forward. So I think it's an essential record. I love it. And it's one that I listen to on a rather regular basis still to this day. So yeah, I love the record.
Yeah, no, that's a good start, Pete. I agree with everything you said. I think the first thing I heard, there used to be a show on a radio station, a rock radio station in Sydney called Triple M. And they used to have a midnight metal show. And they played Slide It In on radio. And I was just blown away. Just the interplay of the guitar, David Coverdale with his vocals, it was just bliss. And just to hear it on radio, and I got the cassette, and I've been in love with the album ever since. So Whitesnake is one of my favorite bands, and
mine too.
I was just showing all those. I've even got the Whitesnake box set. I don't know if you've got this, Pete, but I
have that in digital format. Yes.
Yeah, it's got all the monitor mixes and live cuts, and it's just fantastic. But look, I love that era, the bluesy era. My favorite Whitesnake album, I've always said, is Come and Get It. And
I love that record.
To me, I agree. I think this is probably the end of an era, because at 1987, it was completely a different band. Sonically, they were completely different, and they went off on a different journey. But this, to me, was the end of that era, that bluesy hard rock. And I like yourself, I revisit this consistently. So
yeah, I do too.
All right. Well, there are two song listings. You've got the UK version and you've got the US version. So another thing we could throw in is if there's a preference, because sonically it's different in a lot of the songs. So we can, perhaps we can just reference, I prefer the UK version, the US. My preference, and I'll be straight off the bat, is both. I'd love to have a blend. That would be my ultimate album. And there's actually a couple of blend in the box set where David gets into the sort of the mad professor and gets somebody to mix both into one song. And that's quite an interesting listen. So I'm going to follow the song list of the UK version. So starting off with Gambler, what do you think of that song?
Well, let me say as an overall, if I can tie that in the late 80s, early 90s, when I was working at the audio video store out in Colorado, I had a strong connection with a couple importers in New York. And it turned out that the Whitesnake albums were available from Japan on Warner Brothers, not Geffen. They were on Warner in Japan. And Slide It In was one of them, and it was the UK mix. I ordered it, brought it to the store. As soon as I put it home, whole world changed. My whole view of the record changed. Everything changed. I am an enormous, unapologetic fan of the UK version. There are elements of the US one that I do prefer as well, from what you said, kind of a hybrid. But as an overall top to bottom, if I'm going to do a listening, I put the UK one on 99 out of 100, and I'll only put the US one back on for a show like this where I do a reference and go back and compare and contrast how they work. I just absolutely fell in love with the UK version. So when you're getting to Gambler, one of the things that we talk about is the difference in its sound quality and its production and its mix, more so than anything, because it's not just a difference of reissue or whatever. We've got different recordings. We've got different instrumentation as far as players. We've got two different bands. And the thing that I gravitate to the most as an overall view here on the Gambler, as well as the whole record, is I like the dryness and the breadth and the openness that the UK version provides that I don't feel the US one does. And that translates to me is that Cozy's drums sound like they're sitting in my living room about 5 feet from my face, and I can feel the thrust from his 26-inch kick crushing my rib cage when I hear his bass drums.
Oh yeah, just
the dirt. I can feel the head vibrate, and I don't hear that on the US version. It's the difference between a head that goes woo and one that goes pump. It's tighter, it's more reduced, it is less impactful on the US version, even though the drums may be slightly more forward mixed. They are bigger and more powerful and more organic in the UK version. I think Gambler is one of the top 2 or 3 songs on here. I love that it opens the UK version. I think it's a great opener. And what I like on it too is I like the treatments of the vocals. I liked having the echo during the verses. Victim of circumstance. I liked hearing that on the UK, and I missed it on the US version because it's too busy being filled up by John's guitar stuff. So it's one of my 3 or 4 top 3 probably favorite songs on the record. And I think it's a great opening, and I love the original solo. And I just think that it's a great way to open the record. So that's how I feel about Gambler.
Yeah, well said. I think it's an outstanding track. And I've got to say, I think the intro from John Lord is one of his greatest organ openings ever.
Yeah.
It gives a shiver up my spine. It's haunting, it's atmospheric, and I love it to pieces. I think it's one of the I follow Lordy's career from start to finish, and I don't think he's ever done a better intro than to that song. And it adds gravitas to the whole song. There's something really important we're going to listen to.
Well, I don't know if you agree or disagree. I think one of the big nuances in the UK versus the US, it is way more dynamic. There is way more room for it to
Live.
get big and
It's
then pull back.
Yep.
Yeah. And it
Live.
seems much more organic and natural.
Mm.
The US version kind of all seems a little bit monochromatic. It seems all kind of leveled out. Like they brought everything
FM,
to
for the FM radio.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. And it's not as artistic to me. It just doesn't have as much musicality. And it is apparent right off the shot when Lord comes in and that bass drum kicks in at the beginning of Gambler. And it's just like, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Just love it.
I've heard a ton of bootlegs of this song, but live, they don't seem to kind of get it quite as good as the studio. And it's especially prevalent when they were in that 4-piece, when it was down to Sykes. It
Murray
seemed a little
Sykes.
bit. It seemed a little bit thin. It just didn't have the oomph that you would have expected. So it's one of those songs that I don't think translates as well live, but the UK version is just sublime. And I think it's a great start. And the Cubs vocals, the tonality, it's compelling.
Yes. It's so clean, so powerful. It's got so much emotion behind it. And I think that was one of the things that was kind of the problem with Cozy joining the band. Now, Cozy is one of my favorite drummers of all time, probably top 5. But I don't think he fit well in Whitesnake. And the problem is that they still, at this point, especially in '84, were doing a huge backlog of songs that Ian Pace had done, and they don't have the same feel. They don't have the same presence. And when you add Sykes to the mix, they all just seemed a little bit too hyperdrive, just a little bit too forward, too fast, too aggressive, and they didn't sit. You watch the Tokyo show, you watch any of the other bootlegs and all those on there, they don't sit. It's just too much. It's just too much. And that is a huge departure from what Whitesnake had sounded before. And even as they sounded on the UK version. And one of the reasons why, Cozy wasn't around very long.
Yeah, look, I think he's perfect for this album in the studio.
For the album, absolutely. And, but you just pointed out that it didn't translate live.
Yeah, it didn't. And but look, I've seen the Donington show, and I think Cozy is fine. He's on fire. And that lineup, the Saints and Sinners lineup, and I'm going to talk about that because there'd be no Slide It In sonically if it wasn't for this, because I think Coverdale was really pushing the band into a harder edge. He wanted it more spectacular. He wanted guitar heroes. He was pushing this band as far as he could. And I think he came to a conclusion. I've done as much as I can with the Marsden, Moody, Murray lineup. He dissolved the band because of a managerial problem, and then reformed it with the Slide It In. But I think Powell on that Donington show is on fire, and that lineup actually quite works well. But look, I'll get back on track. Next song, Slide It In. And I'm following the UK track listing. What do you think of this song? You.
Well, to me, this is kind of the ultimate song on the album. And again, in the UK version, there it is sitting in the 2 slot versus the 1 slot on the US version. I like how they kind of set it up with Gambler and then come in with this very accessible, very melodic, but the verses are amazing. And here's where, if you've got any sound system worth its weight in salt, Cozy's drums are just heaven. They are just glorious. And there's so much power. And the choruses are catchy, but not overbearing. They don't repeat it too much. It's just not dialogue, repeat the line over and over. It worked perfect. It was structured perfectly. And I think it's just an exceptional song, and it gets the praise as it rightly deserves. It's one of the Whitesnake classics, and I just think it sounds amazing here. And if I'm looking at, again, I've got the kick drums much bigger. So the US one is slightly less epic. It doesn't sound, it's a matter of personal opinion. Obviously all of this is, but I bought into it right from the opening riff. It's a song we added to the band I was in at the time, right off the bat. And we played it for years because it was just perfect in the set list. And I had a blast playing it. So
yeah,
I love the song.
Yeah. I think it's got a real Rolling Stones feel to it. I've always sort of thought that it's got a bit of a start me up vibe with the guitars and the bass, Colin Bomber Hodgkinson, and the drums. I was on the Whitesnake fan page where you could communicate with David, and I actually dropped him a note and I said, was this song influenced by the Rolling Stones? And he said, no, it wasn't, but I'm a huge fan of the Stones. So that was directly from the DC's mouth, but I always get a Rolling Stones feel about it. Just the chords,
It's got a kind of a start me up feel to it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And what I also loved is the subtlety. And I am a huge fan of Neil Murray. I will go on there. I think his earlier playing in Whitesnake, especially what he does on In the Heart of the City, is just stunning bass playing. Great bass playing. And this is kind of the hybrid part of it. I like what Colin has done in a lot of cases, but I like what Neil added on that side. And if there was a slight blending or balancing and found a happy median between the two, it might be, beyond perfect. But what I love about the UK version is that each verse, the bass is more and more present for each subsequent verse. It's more subtle at first. It's more just drums with the guitar riff and Coverdale filling in everything else. Bass is a little more. Second verse, a little more, going as it goes through the solo. And it built a nice crescendo to a great ending and a great song. And I thought, I appreciated that subtlety. The bass is a little more aggressive in the UK version. In the US version, right off the bat. There's more bass in it. He's playing. You can hear him fill in some of the spaces. But that takes away from the openness. And that takes away from how the riff breathes and counterpart with what Cozy's doing underneath it, which is what I think is the magic of the song. And that's what's the magic of the Stones. You get that great Richards riff with these really great, groovy Charlie Watt underbeats that makes the Stones work.
And Bill Wyman.
Absolutely.
Because Colin Bomber, his bass lines remind me of Bill Wyman. That
very subtle,
really languid, sort of runs. I love it.
Excellent point. You can't have a busy bass player go in that. It ruins it.
No, and I prefer the UK version of this song than the US. To me, it's punchier. And look, I agree with you. It's it's the signature song, isn't it? It's the title track, and it's a signature
I agree.
song. Yeah,
I agree.
All right, next one, Standing in the Shadow. What do you think of this one?
I think that's a great song. And this is one of the songs that mix-wise, you can really hear a difference when you play them back to back. The US, and depending on which side of that fence you are on, either you think Cozy's hi-hat is too far in the back in the mix, or if you're on that in reverse, you say there's too much hi-hat in the US version. And for me, I'm in that. It's way too much hi-hat and it's muddy. I think the mix is not nearly as clean as the UK version. I like that the drums are slightly back. It allows the interplay and the musicianship between the different instruments to be more pronounced and more articulate. It's a great song. It's not a filler. I think it would be a standout on any of their last 3 previous studio records. And so far, they've just kind of gone from strength to strength to strength in slightly different ways. They're different compositions, but I think it's great, and I like where it's placed. I don't like it last on the US version. I don't think that's a good closer. I love it in the middle of side one. And I think that's a great place for it. And I think that is one of the other reasons why I think the UK one so far has outshined the US version.
Yeah, look, I actually like the US version better.
Okay.
And to my ears, I think that's one of the look, I'm more in team UK, but I think that's one of the few US versions that I prefer that version. I think it's you can see it's very radio friendly. I don't know. I think the production, the Olsen production, kind of brings out the melodies a little bit more on the
That's fair.
on the US version to the UK. But yeah, that's just one of the country songs, and that was co-written by Mel Galley. Am I right? Or
I think so. I don't have the credits in front of me.
yeah, but look, I think it's a really strong song, and yeah, I think it's no, it was actually Coverdale. Coverdale,
Okay.
sorry. So Coverdale. There's a lot of self-penned Coverdale songs on this album, and with Galley, we've got to say Mel Galley's guitar playing on this album is quite sublime, and Mick Moody too. You know, he does a lot of leads. I was looking at just checking the track listing, and who, you know, in those Whitesnake albums, you always see who's the lead guitarist because
Right.
you know, with the lyric
Right.
sheet, and there's a hell of a lot of Mick Moody. So when Sykes came in and they had to wipe the Mick Moody tracks, there was quite a few that were just removed.
Yeah, and it was interesting because if you look at the comparisons, you know, Moody's playing alongside Bernie Marsden was a complete complement and supplement. Bernie played completely different. Bernie was a late 60s, early 70s blues-based, you know, from the Peter Green and the Koskoffs, and he had that kind of feel. And Moody had a slightly different kind of feel to it, and it worked really well. And when Marsden was out and when Galley came in, I don't think their contrasts were as big, but they were still complementary to each other. And I think the word that I would use is that they never overplayed. They never overplayed their solos. The solos always fit in the context of the song.
It's got to serve the song. Got to serve the song.
Which I think is very important, which is one of the aspects as we're going along here. And we'll talk more specifically about Sykes individually, where I think that kind of comes off the rails when we start talking about John's solos in the same compositions.
Yeah.
But
and look, there's a whole subplot to this with Mick Moody. I don't think he was very happy during the making of this album. Definitely not on the tour, and he left the band. And just research it out there. It's all on public record and interviews. But I don't think it was quite a happy marriage with Mick Moody and the material of this album comparative to the golden years. And I'd say the golden years, Ready and Willing, Come and Get It, Saints and Sinners, or even earlier. That's that, you know, that earlier lineup. All right. Give Me More Time.
Great tune. Great tune. And I love the syncopation breaks down. Yeah. Wonderful. After the choruses, that syncopated breakdown. Na, 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 na.
Bit of AC/DC. Bit AC/DC. Yep, a little bit.
But again, but they've kind of set that up because there's a little bit of that in Slide It In. There's a little bit of that in Gambler. There'll be more later when we get into some of the other songs. But they're starting to see little trends in compositions for that period that break that up. And then all of a sudden the verse feels refreshing again. It breaks down to something simpler, which has always been focused on Coverdale's vocals.
Yes.
The verses are not overly complex. They're not heavily instrumentation wise. It is about David and his delivery. And he is that next element in an instrument to his own that creates that top layer of that really nice foundational cake. That's what I'm listening to. I'm listening to David. But as soon as David's done, there's these wonderful little interludes, these instrumental things that break things up and create tension and then refocus. And that's, I think, one of the real strengths compositionally of this record, because I think it carries through the whole album, actually, that all the songs have some kind of element to that.
Yeah, it's a great track, and there's space between the notes, and in hard rock, when there's space between the notes, it's all the more powerful. Look at AC/DC; they have based their whole career with space between chords. And when I heard this album for the first time, and I heard that song, I AC/DC. It was just that was the first thing that came to me. But Coverdale's vocals are just sublime. And again, it's that transition. It's a little more, it's got the elements of the blues records, but it's going somewhere else at the same time. But it didn't chop both of your feet off and throw you over the ship. You're still grounded in that, but you're going a little bit further on your adventure, and you're like, okay, well, that's different, but it's not jarring, and it's not unfamiliar, even though it's something new from them. And that's a great accomplishment, and again, we talked about AC/DC all the time, how a band can take the same 5 elements, and the running joke is that I think maybe with one of the records, they interviewed Angus and they said, well, this sounds like your last couple of records. And he goes, only the last couple? Meaning they sound like all of our old records. Well, when you're on a good thing, stick to it.
He's unapologetic about it. He's like, this is what we do. This is who we are.
Yep.
And I think that's why, success-wise, this reached a bigger sales, because it did have that element that now reached out. It did have the hit. It did have, and we'll get to the next track that really kind of pushed it. But it had an accessibility to a group that really didn't listen to Ready and Willing, and didn't listen and didn't know about Come and Get It.
Yes.
And that makes this album really special.
Absolutely. And do yourself a favor if you haven't seen it, Pete. There's a great clip of the Sykes Galley lineup doing this song on the Top of the Pops.
Oh,
I don't know if you've seen the film. It's on YouTube.
I have not.
And Coverdale's just swanning it. Yeah. And you've got all these teeny boppers just looking at it, them, and just going, whoa, what the hell's this?
Right.
But no, it's just a great little clip, bit of fun. All right, now we've got the Big Daddy of the songs. Love Ain't No Stranger. I love this song. What do you think of this song?
We played this one too in our band. It was the second of the tracks that we added from this record when it came out. And to me, this is the first of the real hybrids, because I love the original backing tracks. I love the original instrumentation and mix, but I will give, and because I'm a fair guy, I like Sykes' solo a lot better on the US version than I liked the solo on the UK version. So if you could somehow marry those two together, because I thought Sykes absolutely nailed it. It's melodic, it's subdued, it is accessible, it is so perfect coming off the chorus. And he didn't overplay it. He didn't do any pick squeals or any pick runs down his nothing. It was just all melody, almost like the great jazz players who, when it's their turn to solo, their first part of the solo is just to recapitulate the melody. Just play the melody in some kind of way, but alter it so it's improvisational. That's what I felt that Sykes had done here. He kept the basic elements of the melodic line and just embellished it and made it into a solo. It's short. It's not a long solo. And I think he absolutely nails it. And that is by far my favorite solo that John contributes to the US side. And I have a ton of respect for what he did there. I would have loved for him to do more of that kind of thing, but that's not his really natural style. I don't think so. Yeah. But what a song. I mean,
yep. I think it's one of DC's greatest songs. And I did a show earlier this year with Tim Derling, and it was in the top 5. It is the perfect quintessential Whitesnake song. And if they didn't play this live, I think there'd be a riot in the streets, along with Still of the Night and all the other 1987.
Maybe this will be controversial. This is the one song that I could have heard had it been written at the time. You could have put this on Burn, or you could have put this on Stormbringer, and it would have just been fine. It's the one song, and maybe that sounds odd compared to what's on there.
I have to think about that. I'm going to reflect on that. I'm going to reflect off the show.
Okay.
That's a lot to.
That's my contention, that one song, maybe with a different kind of intro.
Yep.
But I hear that verse and that chorus. I just hear it during that era.
And the lyrics are from the heart. I think they're one of the most heartfelt lyrics that DC's done. Now, DC can be a lazy writer. His wheelhouse is in the lower regions. It's a bit tongue-in-cheek. It's a bit carry-on movies.
Right.
But when he puts his mind to it, he can pull out a good lyric, like Walking in the Shadow of the Blues. Excellent. From the heart. Right. From the heart. And this is one of his most heartfelt and emotionally connected songs. Right. He really believes in the lyric. And I'm even captivated by the video.
Yes.
The video was filmed at Francis Ford Coppola's Zootropy Studios.
I think.
It's got a little bit of a story behind it, and you look at the band, and they look great. They look ready for conquering America.
Either version of this comes on, I'm happy. Yep. Either one. Yep.
But this was the song that kind of broke them in America, didn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. And, he carried the formula over. I don't think Here I Go Again is as strong as Love Ain't No Stranger, but there's elements of it that carry over.
Yep. And when we're talking about a track listing, because order of sequence in an album is very important.
Yes, it is.
So we're finished side 1. Start off with The Gambler, strong. Finish with Love Ain't No Stranger. Pow.
Right.
Side 2, UK version, slow and easy. I mean, what a great opener.
Glorious, heavy, but again, restrained to the point where you can almost feel like it's going to burst. The blues intro is just from the hip. It's DC grinding, the low voice, keep on pushing, baby. I mean, that's him. That's him. And it works perfectly. And then just to unleash, look out.
And then John Bonham doing not John Bonham, but Cozy doing a John Bonham workout.
Yes. And again, what I really like and admire about the UK one is that it doesn't fill up all the spaces of that second verse with a pick squeal or a scratch or a.
I don't mind that though. I don't mind.
I don't need it. I don't need it.
Yeah.
And so it just doesn't work. Neil Murray is much stronger on the US version.
Yeah.
His bass playing on that is stronger. It supports the song better. Collins isn't bad.
Yeah.
But the combination of what Cozy was doing rhythmically with what Neil brought to it under the mix just made it more foundationally strong and made it even heavier. And I appreciated that. So if you can hybrid that one again, that would be great.
I like both. I think both are fine.
The song's just too good.
Yeah.
It survives whatever mix issues you have or whatever production issues you have. It's another one of those songs that whichever version comes on, I'm not turning it off.
It's bulletproof. That's what you're saying. Bulletproof.
Yes,
you can't stuff it up.
Nope. It's too good.
Yep.
And it's very Zeppelin. It's, and of course, he gets criticized that through his whole career, but that's okay. I mean, if you're going to copy anybody, why not copy Zeppelin?
Yeah.
He can sing it. They can play it. I never had a problem with it.
Yeah.
Great track. And I love that it opens side 2.
What he said. I don't have much to add, but I love the tonality. It's just
yes,
one of the great David Coverdale vocals. And every time I've seen Whitesnake, the crowd go ape for this song, especially the American audiences where I've seen Whitesnake in America. They really love that song. So I assume that was another one that was played on FM and really got the cut through.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Great track.
Yeah,
great track.
Absolutely. All right. The next one is Spit It Out. Won't go too much into the lyrical content, but
if you don't like it,
if you don't like it, but
if you don't like it,
again, tongue in cheek. What do you think of this song?
You know what? If you take the lyrics out of it, it's a strong composition. There's some good musical things to listen to there. You know, it's not as hard to listen to as say like Kitten Got Claws or something like that.
Oh God, don't get me started on that song.
Which I can't listen to. That is just dumb lyrics with bad music. That's the combination that just doesn't work at all.
Oh geez.
This is David. Obviously everybody reads it and goes, yeah, okay.
And he's pushing the envelope, pushing it out.
Oh, he is. But musically, it's a fun track. And there's great playing, and the choruses are strong. They're catchy, and you find yourself kind of in your head. You spit it out, spit it if you don't.
And it builds up, doesn't it? When it goes,
you're addicted. You're hooked on it, and that's the sign of a good song. And then later you can say, well, we just won't reference the lyrics again, or, everything like that. But it's the laziest vocal, although. For what it's intended to do, it's for the double entendre and everything else, or even just the obvious, slap in the face, it's well done.
Yeah.
And I can't disrespect it for that.
Yeah. I'm surprised that this album didn't get a parental guidance sticker. It must have been on the cusp.
Yeah.
If
it's not like you can't hear what he's saying.
Yeah. This would have been like just on the border of getting an R rating or a parental guidance sticker.
Right.
But it got through. But look, there's a bit of build up in this song that it gets more hysterical as it goes along. I'll use the word hysterical. It just
that works. That kind of covers it.
Yep. All right. All or Nothing.
This is my favorite track on the album.
Okay.
Absolutely love it. From the very first notes of the intro, it's just the comment I wrote down on here was menacing. It's just relentless. And right off the bat, it's just cozy underneath.
Yeah, UK version. I love the UK.
And it never lets up. Never lets up. And you do that instrumental break where he goes to the toms. It's perfect. Now, what I like is, what I don't like is I didn't like the extra toms added after the fact on the US version. Well, you're gonna burn. I don't need that.
Yeah.
It wasn't there on the original, so I don't need that extra drum part. That's just frills, and that's just Kolodner getting him and Olsen getting their bits in. I've got issues with Kolodner, but I love this track. It's like I said, my favorite on here, and there's nothing about this song that I don't like.
Yeah,
it's just perfect.
Yeah, I'll disagree a little bit. The thing that doesn't work for me, and I love John Lord, but I don't like the John Lord bit in the middle, the solo with the drums. Okay. I don't think it sounds a bit awkward to me. And the US remix where it pushes John Lord's track even further down in the mix is worse. It's sort of like you've got this 1 minute where the solo is, where it's nothingness.
Right. It's all rhythm guitar.
Yes. it's sort of like
yeah.
it's almost dead air, and then it goes into the guitar. So I think they really stuffed up there. But if I was working on that song, if I was Martin Birch, and he's a great producer, and this is one of his sublime production pieces, but yeah, just that bit with the keyboards and the drums, it just sounds a little awkward. They could have done something a little bit different. I don't know what, but I agree. Sonically,
I also think that these are DC's his best vocal performance as well. He is just biting off the words. Tonight's the night. I mean, and he's showing the range. And I waited such a long time. I mean, and out of control. I mean, it's just all the way through the song, and it was worth the wait. Getting it that late in the album to have a track that far into the recording that I just like, not too often people's favorite song is the eighth track on the record.
Absolutely.
And I thought, holy smokes, that was just really strong, especially after Spit It Out.
Yeah. And in the era of loading up all the pow 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 songs in the first side, it's a joy that they've got, right deep into the album. They've got a killer.
I thought it was perfect pacing, a great pound in the face right after, your kind of reaction to Spit It Out. But then all of a sudden here is, I think, the best and the most menacing track on the record. I absolutely love it.
Yep. Hungry for Love.
This one's interesting. And Hungry for Love and Guilty of Love. Those are the two tracks that I said, wholly, the US versions are more preferable for me. I don't think they are as strong on the UK versions. There was just whatever happened with the change in the mix and the sonics and everything else. I also think that these are the two weakest, however you think about Spit It Out or not, I think these are the two weakest compositions on the album. I would put all of the others ahead of it, which makes the UK version end a little weak. If we're looking at it in its totality, all or nothing would, I don't want it to end at 8 tracks, but I think it was a little bit of a letdown. Hungry for Love seems to me like a typical Whitesnake. I don't want to say filler because I think that's diminishing of songs. It's not filler. It's just maybe not as compositionally as strong as something else. But to me, that is more of one of those lesser tracks they're on Saints and Sinners. There are those lesser ones on Come and Get It and Ready and Willin' and Love Hunter. And it's just one of those tracks. And, if it had been the, third or fourth song surrounded by other stuff and ended a little stronger, I would probably feel better about it and maybe not think it I thought it was a big letdown compared to All or Nothing. And, but I do like the US version better.
Yeah. So you put this on a par with, say, off Saints and Sinners, Rock and Roll Angels or Dancing Girls, like that. Yeah. A little bit. Yeah. I don't mind
Blind Women in Song, something like that.
I like that song.
I'm not saying I don't like it.
Yeah.
I'm not saying I don't like it. It's still melodic. It's still there. It just doesn't have as much to hold on to. Dave is still driving the song, but the band underneath doesn't contribute much to the song to help him. It's all Dave.
Yeah. So it's slightly throwaway. A
little bit.
Yeah.
That's the first of the lot.
Yeah. Okay. I might agree with you. I don't think it's one of their strongest, but I like it. I think it's, I think the filler tracks, or I won't say filler, but the ones that are not top shelf in this album are stronger than Saints and Sinners. So
I agree.
I would put this greater than, say, Dancing Girls or Love and Affection.
And then let's look at the US version for just a quick second. We can discuss whether the front loading of their 3 big hits is what you want, but there's All or Nothing at 4. And to me, that in my head is the perfect spot for it. Right there at the end of side 1, You've got stuff ahead of it. You've got a lot more tracks after it to support the rest of the record and help hold that up. But this late in the album, especially followed by Guilty of Love, we'll get to that in a second, I didn't think was as strong an ending.
Yeah. Well, let's go to Guilty of Love. What do you think of that song?
I never cared for a live version of it.
Yeah.
I think it's
single.
Very cool.
Yeah, he's all cuffed up and he's guilty of love. Take him
That's
away.
Right.
Take him away, Judge.
It's got more energy. It's a good, powerful ending song, but I do like where in the US version they start side 2 with it. I think it's a good opener. It's got a little more speed, a little more energy and drive to it. And that's a good way to end a record. I'm not saying it's not. But the solos are okay. There's not too much. I was looking for an extra part, whether it was a bridge or something to just break up that continuous, constant feel that the opener establishes right off at the beginning. Now they break it down live where they have the crowd sing Guilty of Love and it goes on for like 5 days. But I was looking for just one other element compositionally and it wasn't there. I don't dislike it. I don't skip it or turn it off, but it's not one of my favorites on the album.
Yeah. Well, this song is actually one of my favorites of the album.
Very cool.
It came out ahead of the Donington concert. And to me, it sounds a little bit like Elton John Crocodile Rock. Dun, 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 dun.
Yeah. Right.
Have you ever picked that up? Because that was one of the things when I listened to this album for the first time, I go, gee, that sounds like that a little bit.
Well, and the verses are exactly the same feel, tempo, everything as the verses are. So verse into chorus is just a change of lyric that differentiates how that steamrolls through there. And then this is one of the tracks that I have a hard time in my head getting Sykes out of it, because every time I heard him live, they'd go to the solo and he'd just unleash this crazy flurry of things that had nothing to do with the song whatsoever, and I'm trying to purge that forever from my head. So when I went back to the record, it was more enjoyable.
Yeah.
But it's a good chorus. Verses are strong. And I like that they use the harmonies right off the shot.
Yeah.
It's just the verses have the backing harmony, and it's a good melody.
Yeah, I think it's very classic rock to me. It's like classic 70s rock, and I think it's a fine close of the album. But yeah, that Elton John was always in my head about that song. It's just
that'll work.
Yeah, it does. And I've seen a few live videos in the day, and there's some great interplay between the Cub and the audience on this song. I'm guilty of love, and he goes, yeah, so am I, sweetheart, and just pointing to ladies in the audience. And he's a great front man.
Yes, he is. And he really came out of his shell too. And the confidence that he obtained through whatever means, he looks a little sheepish. Of course, it's overwhelming. You go to the US and there you are on stage at Cal Jam, and you're like, okay, that's a bit overwhelming.
First gig.
Yeah. And we also have to admit, Glenn Hughes casts a pretty big shadow of personality. And I think it's not lost on David or anybody else that at the time, maybe a lot of people were thinking, this DC guy's okay, but that Glenn Hughes guy can sing his brains out. And maybe we're listening to the wrong guy.
Yeah.
And fair or unfair, Glenn was way more mature. Obviously, he'd gone through trapeze and everything. I mean, he was full on veteran. And that had to be intimidating for David. And
having a check for $1 million in your back pocket, that would be intimidating too.
Right. Well, and Richie probably looking at you cross-eyed every 5 seconds going, that was good, that was bad, that was good, that was bad, but he certainly came out of it. And by this stage, this is fully formed David Coverdale. This is him in I don't want to say full prime, and maybe perhaps it is.
I think it is.
He's not overreaching for his things. He's very energetic live. He's got the reputation. Joe Elliott used to always call him Mr. One Take. They'd be in the same studios and like, oh, who's over there? Oh, Coverdale's over there. You want to go watch? He goes, no, because it's depressing. He goes over there. Coverdale rips one vocal off and they go, that'll work, because he was so good at it.
Yeah.
And so, but there was a lot of respect for a lot of those singers through that era, especially the ones who did European touring and that kind of thing. My God, Whitesnake seemed like they were playing the Odin Hammersmith every other weekend.
Yes.
They were huge.
Yeah.
Absolutely. In Japan, they were huge too. And it's really big and just crickets over here until this came out.
Yes. Well, this album went platinum. It charted, I think, in the lower reaches in the US, went to number 10, I think, in the UK. But this definitely set the wheels in motion for the Whitesnake story and that next chapter into 1987. I'm going to put an interesting question to you. Do you think this is a very direct, punchy album? Okay, it's very in your face. It's very direct. If they kept on this road sonically, do you think they would have had a longer career? And even with the optics, because the optics in 87 was completely different. This blew everybody away when you saw the vision of Coverdale with the blonde hair, glam. It was very confronting. Listening to 1987, my mouth was like on the floor, was what am I listening to? Because it sounded nothing like Come and Get It, which is my favorite Whitesnake album.
Right.
Do you think that they would have had more of a long-lasting career if they were down that blues hard rock road and didn't go down that short sugar hit of glam or hair metal?
They did the blues thing for a long time. And distribution, what it was, and everything else, those records were not even getting to the mainstream US. They weren't even over here. You had to get them through imports. It's the only way you could get them most of the time. I look at 87 and I have an extreme love-hate relationship with that record. Yes, when I heard it, it was so different. And then if I just accept it for what it was becoming, I think it's one of the poorest quality recordings of any band I've ever heard. I just think it is muddy and mucky and it's way too thick. Ainsley Dunbar is a tremendous drummer, but good God, his drums are so buried in the mix. There's no life to them whatsoever. And I don't care whatever remasters or remix you do to it. Drums recorded poorly remixed are just more drums recorded poorly remixed. And Sykes went way overboard. It's, if you listen to those great Zeppelin records, the beauty is that, yes, it's powerful. Yes, it's got an amazing amount of energy, but you always heard Jimmy here, John Paul here, Bonham here, and together you heard all of them clean as a band with a vocalist soaring over the top. If you had this kind of, let's just say this mix or recording technique from Martin on this, I think it becomes one of the greatest hard rock records of all time. The material is there. David sings his brains out. Crying in the Rain, Still the Night, obviously one was a carryover, but there is some really great stuff. And I think at the point where they became huge, videos took over. It was about how they looked and not necessarily anymore how they sounded. And all of us who are huge fans of the earlier era think of it in exact opposite terms. It's about how they sounded. We didn't care how they looked.
Yep.
And that transposition, and Coverdale said it himself, MTV saved him years of tours in the clubs. Catapulted them right into, all of a sudden, 87 came out, and once it finally kicked in, I saw him open for Motley Crue on the Girls, Girls, Girls tour. Next thing I knew, they were headlining.
And the rest is history. History.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they had a recognizable band. You brought in Aldridge and Sarzo, and you grabbed Vivian, and
easy on the eye, optic,
Absolutely.
Much more easy on the eye than say that, these guys.
Yeah, those guys, MTV doesn't care about the look of that band.
Yeah, that's the
doesn't
thing.
Care.
But
Doesn't
Mick
care.
Moody in interviews is quite pissed off, pardon the French, because he feels that if they stuck at it with the band, they could have been an AC/DC band, which was image proof. The
Right.
denim, the rock, if they stuck to that sort of image, because that sound in Slide It In was kind of in the, the AC/DC wheelhouse. And to me, that's kind of trend proof. And
Right.
look at AC/DC now. They are still a major draw card. Well, they're not touring at the moment, but they are. So in the UK,
let me suggest this. They could have answered your own question. If Kolodner and the folks at Geffen had just released the UK version, what would have done and where would have been? The album existed. It's the UK one, and it's the one that most of us have preferred here.
Yeah.
If you take that and use that as the template, and this sells 3 or 4 million records, it says the songs with these sonics are working.
Yep.
But you changed it, and now we don't know.
Mm.
Was it?
Yeah. Well, in the UK, they're still a major draw card. So
Sure.
they play the O2. They play fairly sizable concert halls, arenas. But
Right.
in America, they're on the circuit, that sort of smaller base, because they're lumped in the hairband.
Right.
And I'm just reflecting, like, Slide It In sonically, if they went in a different direction and went down that AC/DC Aerosmith route, bluesy but commercial, and still MTV friendly with a different sort of image, they may have had more legs in the later part of their career in America, because in America they're sort of doing the rockaramas or the nostalgia circuit, and that's a bit disappointing.
Let me suggest this, and I brought this up a lot in the Aerosmith one that I did with Ryan on his channel, and I mentioned his name before, that John Kolodner during this period of time at Geffen was really pushing all the bands under their tutelage to go into the much more overproduced style. He did it with Aerosmith. Now, the reason it worked with Aerosmith is because Aerosmith agreed to change who they were to record songs that were not natural to Aerosmith. They made that deal. I don't know if Whitesnake would have made that kind of a deal. It was hard to imagine that this bluesier thing could have ever materialized down the road with Kolodner in charge over at Geffen, because they couldn't even get the UK version passed. They had to pump it up. They had to overproduce it. And that's what Kolodner did.
Mm.
And so I think they were up against it US wise. And of course, you can't discount the sales of 87, and you can't discount Permanent Vacation and Pump and Get a Grip they sold a gazillion records.
Yeah, well, DC lives off 87 royalties.
Yes.
So I say it was, I mean, for a brief moment, they were right up there in the rock pantheon, but slip of the tongue. And then it was like,
I haven't bought anything since.
Yeah, but sales wise. So, but artistically, I'm just thinking, I don't know, artistically and commercially, I have this theory that they could have maintained the integrity and the sound wheelhouse of Slide It In, instead of going down that more glossy hair metal 1987 approach. And I like 1987 a hell of a lot. I think it's an outstanding album. I differ with you a little bit on that.
No, I love the material.
Yeah,
I love the material. I just can't get past the Sonics.
But have it a longer career, and especially in America, and have that consistently bigger audience.
Well, because they got lumped in.
Yeah.
And their image was hard to say they weren't. You say, oh, this is a blues-based band. Look.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah. Well,
and again, he went back to, especially on Slip of the Tongue, he took the Spit It Out theme and ran crazy with it.
Yeah.
The whole album's full of all these entendres and, you just be, which, didn't work for me.
DC said it was the Christmas tree era.
Yes.
So I'll leave that. Pete, this has just been a magnificent chat. We have to do this again. This was
anytime, sir.
Extraordinary because, anything about the Deep Purple family or Whitesnake, it's a rabbit hole that I love to just get right into. And
I'm right with you.
You have delivered in spades, my friend.
Well, thank you, sir.
So please like and subscribe to Rock Daydream Nation. Tell me what you think. Do you like the old Whitesnake? Do you like the 87 Whitesnake or even the later Whitesnake? I don't care. David's one of my favorite singers of all time, and just put your comments. And
right,
you and I, Peter and I, will do a show very soon. Cheers.